Today I'm going to be servicing my winches, and I'm going to take you step by step through how to disassemble the winch, clean it, and then reassemble it to make sure it still works when we're done. Now the first thing we're going to need are supplies. I have, among other things, a hammer and screwdriver, because I use that to loosen the top cap, like so. This is how we start the disassembly. I also have a set of dental tools. You can find these sometimes at the electronics store because they're used for soldering and things like that. But these will be helpful to clean some of the grit and grease out of the teeth of the gears. I have some solvent, paint thinner in this case, to degrease the components. Got a disposable roasting pan. I'll put the solvent in here to soak the parts and clean them. I have an old toothbrush to use to clean the parts. Okay, you saw me use the screwdriver and hammer and tap loose the top cap. So now we can simply unscrew it, and now we begin assembling the stack. You'll notice in here that there is an O-ring. We can clean these parts later as part of the process. You take off the stripper arm. See, it's toothed so it can fit around the winch any number of ways. You might want to remember how that came off. Sometimes it could be useful to use this with a camera. You know, take different pictures as you go so you know how the thing came apart. Now there's a little arm here that you may not be able to see very well, and there's a groove on the back side of the stripper arm. That little black piece fits inside the stripper arm when you put this back together. Now that we've got the top nut and the cap off, we can take off the drum. The drum is just basically a big hunk of stainless steel. There's toothed gears along the bottom which engage the gears here in the winch. Okay? Now inside here there is a set of pin bearings. We will be cleaning these later, but for the time being I'm going to leave them inside the winch drum. Now the outer bearings come off. Right down here at the base is a little pin. Okay, now I use this screwdriver to work out this pin. Okay, once the pins, there's actually two pins, one on both sides, because there's two sets of gear assemblies. Okay. Okay, once the pins come out, then the gear assemblies follow. So we take the pins out, and now I can pull out the gear assemblies. It's important to remember which ones go where and how, because they only go back in one way. What I like to do is when I take the pins and the gears out, I put the pins back in the piece they came from. Now if you look carefully here, you can see this is actually two pieces. Inside of this thing down here, and I'll show you a little later, are the pawls that click when you work the winch. We've got to disassemble all of this, clean these pieces, and then put brand new springs in when we're done here. You might be able to see there's water and whatnot in this assembly, so that's another reason for making sure things are clean and done. Okay, now there's an inner spindle that has a gear on the bottom that engages the gear assemblies we just took out. So to get that out, there are two little keys on either side, and they're very small. We have to pull those out. A pair of needle nose works fine for that. And like so. And now we can lift out the internal assembly. So you see the gears here which engage the gear assembly. Alright? Now that all the parts are out, I can use a solvent, clean off all the old grease, re-grease the parts, and reassemble. Now once you get all the pieces apart, you really have to take time, the dental tool, get in all the gear teeth, get all the old, dried, hard grease and particulates out, rinse them in the solvent. Do not use like a steel wool, because you're going to get little steel wool shards embedded in the teeth here. But you want to clean everything really well. Scrub, grind, get all the old grease out. Dip it in clean solvent, make sure all the old dirt and old grease is off, then set it aside and let it dry. Same thing with the bearing races, which go around the shaft here. Dip them in some solvent, use an old toothbrush and wipe them in the solvent, then dip them in some clean solvent, run your fingers around it, make sure things are smooth and clean, and then likewise set those aside. And all the pieces, same thing. You want to go all the way around, make sure that the gear teeth are clean, all the old debris and old grease is out. Let everything clean up, and then let the solvent evaporate off before you begin greasing and reassembling. You're going to want to buy a spare parts kit. And the spare parts kit will have all the small pieces that you're going to need. You'll find the little pieces that go at the top here to hold the spindle in. You're going to find some of the plastic sleeves that go into some of the pinholes. You're going to find new pawls. Now when you're doing your maintenance, you want to check the pawls that come out. If they don't look worn, if the edges are nice and clean and there's no obvious wear, you can reuse them. But what you don't want to reuse are the springs that hold the pawls into the gearing. The springs are little tiny things. You probably can't see them here. It's very small. They might look okay when you take them out, but don't take a chance. It's not worth it. A replacement parts kit like this costs about $50. And there are enough parts in here to service 3 winches. Once you get the pawls reassembled, make sure they move smoothly, that there's no obstruction, the springs have springiness to them. Again, you should always use new springs when reassembling this. Take just a little dab of grease and rub a thin coat on all the smooth surfaces, including the pawls. Just run your fingers kind of in the direction that the pawls go. And then take the mating piece, squeeze the pawls in, and fit the piece together. See how that works? Nice and smooth. And obviously in the opposite direction it blocks. Alright? I've already taken some fresh grease and re-greased the bearing races here. And now we're ready to begin reassembling the stack. So first we have to put the individual bearing pieces, gear pieces back into the stack. Remember that the pins only fit one set of gears, so you can always know which side goes where. Okay, so I've got the stacks all reassembled. They've been greased. The poles are in, nice and clean. Okay, now on the winch column itself, you'll notice that the cutouts on either side are different sizes. That's a clue as to which gears go where. On the large side, which is this one, the large gear goes down. And we put the pin in. Let me get on top so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. Now, notice that the big gear went down on this one, so that means on the other side the big gear on the small cluster should go up to mate in with the small gear on the big side. And again, the pin goes in like so. Now we're going to take the spindle and again put a little grease on the gear teeth and just a little bit of grease on the shaft itself. And we reinsert that down in here like this. Okay, let me wipe my hands off before I continue. Okay. Now there's a base plate that goes in here. That's the base for the bearing races. Then we put the bearing races on, followed by a separator column. Now all these parts have already been pre-greased. And then the second column. Then we take the keeper keys and reinsert those. You may have to turn the spindle a little bit until we find the notch where the spindle will lock in. It's a little tough sometimes with greasy fingers. So here, let me come over here. Ah, there we go. Little vertical lift. And she fits right in. Likewise on that side. Okay. And now we are ready for the drum. Okay. We just put this right back down, just like this. You're going to give a spin. Remember that the winch only goes in one direction, so you want to give a spin here, turn the spindle in both directions, make sure the drum turns accordingly. Remember, one way is easier than the other. Okay, now that we have the drum on, and we've tested out the reassembly, make sure things are moving easily rather, we want to put the stripper finger back on. Now remember the two pieces that hold the spindle had little fingers on them. This fits in those fingers. There's also a little stripper arm that rolls around the top of the winch. That has to align with the finger. So get the finger where you want it and make sure it's engaged with the stripper finger like you want. It's a little bit of a puzzle. Oh, hold on. Up, the pieces came out. Okay, let's try that again. Okay, and you have to lift the spindle a little bit. Okay. We line up the stripper and the jigs, and there we go. Now the top cap has an O-ring in it. I cleaned the cap, I cleaned the O-ring. It's a big problem with winches, especially on boats used in salt water, are the salt crystals. So I cleaned all the pieces to make sure all the grit was removed. The O-ring here helps to seal out moisture from the inside. I didn't grease it though. And then we simply screw the cap back on. The winch has been serviced, she works, and we're ready for the next 4.